we know it's a historical fact that the Phoenicians circumnavigated Africa. They were the first to do so. But I believe they were crossing the seas. They had remarkable boats. The Phoenicians devised their boats in such a way that they could be disassembled and then reassembled very quickly. So almost like linking logs or Legos or something like this. The Phoenicians, they could arrive to the shores of a distant continent. They could disassemble their boats, carry the planks through the forest, over the landscape, and then reassemble the boats in the rivers, in the waterways. And if we think about, in terms of North America, they could have arrived at the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They could have taken their boats as far as they could get down the water wave. When they encountered an impediment such as Niagara Falls, they could disassemble their boats, carry the planks over land, reassemble the boats in the waterways, and make their way to the Great Lakes. Right? And so the Phoenicians were remarkable boat builders. They were remarkable craftsmen. In fact, I believe that the Phoenicians were the only post-flood culture that could still build megaliths. And they did so on the island of Sardinia, although not to the same grandeur as the antediluvian civilizations, but yet they held the knowledge. They vouchsafed the knowledge. They were the keepers of secret knowledge. Indeed, the Phoenicians were, in effect, a secret society. And modern masonry, Freemasonry, is derived from the mysteries of the Phoenicians. Who was Hiram Abiff? Hiram Abiff, who was basically the founder of the Masonic order. The Masons will say maybe that Solomon, or perhaps even go all the way back to Tubal-Cain or Enoch, or maybe perhaps Nimrod as the founder of their society, of their fraternity. But if you look at the lore of the Masons, you're going to discover that Hiram Abiff is really regarded as the founder. And Hiram Abiff, according to legend, was hired by Solomon to help them build the temple. Indeed, it was King Hiram who was a good friend of Solomon's, who Solomon employed, and all of King Hiram's artisans to build the temple. Who was Hiram? We're talking about the king of Sidon and Tyre. He was a Phoenician king. So Hiram was the king of the Phoenicians. And these were the master masons. These were the master artisans of the ancient world, and they were the master mariners, and they were their alphabetical system is the foundation of our own. That's why we call it phonics, because it comes from Phoenician, because it was the Phoenicians who created the alphabetic system that we use today, the base of it, the foundation of it, which we've elaborated on, the Greeks and the Romans and so forth. We've all elaborated on that system, but the Phoenicians were remarkable. And there's very little known about the Phoenicians, even though they were probably the most remarkable ancient civilization in regard to their great knowledge, even more so than the Egyptians, as it pertains to their ability in masonry and boat making and so forth. Remember, it was the cedars of Lebanon, the planks that were used in the great temples in the Levant and in the Fertile Crescent in Egypt. The wooden planks of their temples and their great boats, all of everything that was made. I shouldn't say everything. Much of what was made out of wood for the royal palaces and the great temples came from Lebanon, from the cedars of Lebanon. And those cedars were delivered by the Phoenicians and worked by the Phoenicians, the master craftsmen, the master masons, the master mariners, the master navigators of the ancient world. So I believe that the Phoenicians were harboring secret knowledge that they somehow were able to conserve, that was either given to them or they discovered from the pre-flood world. I don't think that the Phoenicians brought the language from the pre-flood world. I think that they were a secret society. The whole civilization was like a secret society. Very little is known about it today, but they were essential. If you want to understand the ancient world, truly understand it, especially in regard to trade, then you have to be familiar with the Phoenicians. You have to familiarize yourself with the Phoenicians because they are coming in and out of all these different cultures all the time, and everyone's talking about them. The Greeks were talking about them. The ancient Egyptians were talking about them. The Persians were interacting with them. Everybody was interacting with the Phoenicians. Of course, the Hebrews were interacting with the Phoenicians, sometimes on very friendly terms, like Solomon and King Hiram of Tyre, and sometimes there was hostility. But the Phoenicians are always an important element of what's happening in the ancient world, and yet we know almost nothing about them. We know a whole lot about the ancient Egyptians. We know a whole lot about the other Mesopotamian civilizations and the ancient Greeks and so forth, but we know very little, almost nothing about the Phoenicians. Of course, the most famous Phoenician that everyone is familiar with that they don't realize is Hannibal Barca, who was the greatest enemy that Rome had ever seen. The greatest enemy with whom Rome had ever contended was Hannibal. And where was he from? Carthage. Carthage was in North Africa, and Carthage was a Phoenician settlement. They were Phoenician. And the Romans were appalled by the Phoenicians precisely because the Phoenicians were in the habit of sacrificing their children to idols, to Baal, and the other Phoenician gods. And they would sacrifice their children in the most heinous way, and the Romans were incensed by this. This is one of the reasons why the Romans hated the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians came very close to destroying Rome through Hannibal. These were remarkable people, and almost nothing is known of them, even though they were, in my estimation, sailing their remarkable ships to the shores of many different continents.
This is what the elite, so-called elite, practice. This is nothing new. This has been going on since the time of Rome and Carthage and Babylon, and the Babylonian gods will show up for you, Baal and Moloch. There's other ones as well. If you read certain old spell books, or grimoires as they're called, and you practice the ceremonies as they instruct, and you draw the thing on the floor, and you wear the right costumes and masks and candles and stuff, and you do the right chanting, then guess what? You're going to have this ghost appear as some type of demonized creature that looks really terrifying. It's a being of pure horror, as I said. This is going to become common knowledge. It's going to become as common and everyday as 1 + 1 = 2, that there was a group in power on earth and that this is what they were doing, is practicing this stuff. They keep it very, very secret. They'd have these very tight races against, left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, but nobody would ever talk about what was really going on. They're doing it constantly, and that's why you see all these people missing. 325,000 missing, right? We've talked about that. This is because they need victims to do these ceremonies properly. That's what's going on, folks. It's really dark, it's really horrible, and it makes a big mess when they're doing it, as you can imagine. These are really horrific things, but anyway, they are going to be exposed, and the whole world will change because it sounds like some cheesy horror movie. Wait a minute. You're telling me that the people running the planet are freaking doing all this stuff? Bull S. I don't even believe it. This is nonsense. No. It's as serious as a heart attack, and whether you believe it or not, they're doing it. They believe it, and that's what matters, is that they are actively practicing this, and people are being hurt and killed.
I get the sense, and I know this is conspiratorial, but I get the sense that there's somewhat of a conspiracy revolving around the Phoenicians. I think the Phoenicians were in possession of knowledge and artifacts that would, to some extent, should they come to light, rewrite history. Artifacts from the antediluvian world. And part of those artifacts would be the genetic stock of the Nephilim, the descendants of the Nephilim, who were certainly in their midst.